This week, Paul and I interview Dan Kuykendall, Senior Director of Application Security at Rapid7. In the news, Apple corrects stories on the latest iPhone brute force passcode hack. A Lacework study finds 300 unsecured container orchestration dashboards. And Microsoft is porting Skype to React Native. Stay tuned for all that and more on this episode of Application Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production. Layered Insight is the industry's first embedded security approach for containers. Trusted by Global 1000 enterprises to secure their containerized applications, it's the only solution that requires no root privileges, has zero dependency on the underlying infrastructure, and is fully portable across any container environment. Unified DevOps and SecOps, enabling the rapid development of containerized applications without worrying about security. To learn more, please visit layeredinsight.com/ASW. Rapid7 powers the practice of SecOps. Using shared data, analytics, and automated workflows, SecOps unites IT, DevOps, and security teams to make security an outcome of innovation. Rapid7 combines technology, expertise, and advocacy to drive vulnerability management, application security, incident detection, and log management for more than 7,000 organizations worldwide. Power up your SecOps practice with a free trial at rapid7.com/securityweekly. Hard-coded credentials can be trouble, but not as much trouble as a vulnerable DevOps environment. If you want protection without the hassle of security slowing you down, CyberArk, the #1 provider in privilege access security, has the solution for you. With CyberArk Conjur, developers can easily secure secrets across any DevOps toolchain or platform, whether your application runs in the cloud or on premises. Eliminate the headaches of managing secrets and try Conjur open source for free with no strings attached. Visit conjur.org/ASW to get started today.
Welcome, everyone, to episode 21, our 22nd episode of Application Security Weekly. I am, of course, your host, Keith Hoodlet, and I'm excited to be joined by my illustrious co-host, Paul Asadorian.
Thanks, Keith. It's good to be here today. What's going on?
Good to be back, dude. I mean, I missed a week, but thankfully you and Michael held down the fort. Thank you very much to Michael Santarcangelo for that. And yeah, it's exciting. I mean, we're going to have an interview here with Dan Kuykendall of Rapid7 here in a minute. Any announcements, Paul, that we wanted to cover real quick before we introduce Dan?
I don't think so. We're pretty light on announcements now. I think conference season for the spring has kind of settled down, so
Cool. Well, in that case, then, let me introduce to our listeners Dan Kuykendall, Senior Director of Application Security Weekly. Application Security Weekly. Blah, I say that too much. Mm-hmm. Senior Director of Application Security Products at Rapid7, where he directs the strategic vision, research, and product development for the company's application security solutions. Interestingly, when I worked at Rapid7, I talked about this quite a lot with the customers there. So, in addition, of course, to keeping up with the latest attack patterns, Dan's focused on some of the tougher aspects of application security, namely the evolving web and application development as well as mobile application development trends that are going on today. So he does this with a philosophy that we need to help security experts by keeping up with automation and, as much as possible, free up pen testers for the tough work that requires human brains. With that, Dan, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Glad to be here. I think this is maybe my second time on Paul.com, where I was on Paul.com a couple times, right, back in the day.
Wow. We haven't called it that name in a long time, Dan.
Yeah, I know. Well, that's why I'm referring back, way back.
There you go. It was called that name back then, yes.
Yeah. Needless to say, it has been a little while since Dan has been on one of the shows. So, Dan, super glad to have you here with us.
Nice.
I mean, God, Paul.com, that's 10 years? I don't even know. It's a long
Episode
time.
Episode 305.
Well, actually, with Santa, with Michael Santa.
Santarcangelo.
Me and him did a show, I think back in 2005.
We used to do, what was that called, Dan? We used to do the something roundtable.
We had that special thing on iTunes, right?
Yeah,
we had that
Security
special
Roundtable
group.
Yeah, it was Security Roundtable. Yeah.
Security Roundtable, that's what it was.
We've talked about reviving that at some point, so we'll have to invite you back if we do.
Absolutely. Love to do it.
So, Dan,
but again, thanks for having me.
Go ahead, sorry.
Oh, I just said thanks for having me.
I'm jumping in then. In that case, so especially given that you've been around the block, I mean, you were talking security back with Paul over 13 years ago, not to make any of us feel old here. But since you've been talking about security for such a long time, I'm curious to know, maybe just to get started, in the time that you've been in application security, what are some of the trends that you're seeing in terms of the way that development is changing over time, and how is security keeping up with those changes, or is it keeping up with those changes?
Well, it's not, but we need to try, and we need to keep pushing on that effort. The trends, I think, in the last really 4 or 5 years, they've been the changes have been dramatically faster than they were, for the decade plus before that, right? I mean, it's been ramping up, and a lot of it has to do with these single page applications and kind of all the built for cloud environments that are sprouting up today. With containers and whatnot, the applications are just much more dynamic. Mobile obviously adds to that because it's helped push the delivery of all these REST APIs, which are a huge part of our backbone now. So everything has changed in the last several years. Just much much more activity on the client side.
So would you say that, especially, I mean, it's not necessarily related to technology, but as a process, has the Agile and then lately the DevOps movement been a factor in increasing the pace of just development as a whole, especially as we see cloud environments today? Would you count that as maybe one of the factors that has kept security from actually like keeping pace, just because in a lot of ways we haven't adopted those methods or those practices?
I don't know if it's kept us from keeping pace. It's certainly, for the dev community, one thing that's important with application security is staying on top of the way applications are being developed, right? And so the way that they're developing applications these days, with the agile development models, has really increased the pace of development. So that's just been good for dev. But it does mean that you have to be a little more active and proactive at getting security injected into there. But fortunately, some of the tooling around it, around this model, with going with these very quick sprints and this agile development model, and then the DevOps that makes a lot of this possible, it actually is an opportunity for security to get in early, but the tools have to adapt. And that's really where I've seen a lot of the challenges that, for a while it seemed like, there was a lot of people saying like the dynamic scanners were dead because they weren't keeping up. And I don't think that has to do with the nature of dynamic scanning. It has to do with the nature, the innovation by the dynamic scanning developers and companies that are building dynamic scanners. We can keep up. We have a place. But we just have to push and we have to innovate, and that was something that wasn't happening very well.
So with dynamic application scanning solutions, what was maybe the reason why people were saying they weren't keeping up? Was it as you kind of cited earlier, with the advent of more client-side code that was preventing the scanners from crawling the sites? What was it maybe that was the problem in place that kept, or gave people the impression that dynamic application scanning was too slow, which, by the way, I think that static analysis scans are also pretty slow, for those that were saying it. But I'd be curious to know, what has changed that caused that belief, and then also what has changed that has since answered that problem set that is perceived.
Well, part of it was the original design of most of the tools. Most of the tools were built largely around the old style applications where, you can crawl a link, look at the forms, look at all the inputs, and then start delivering attacks purely with HTTP traffic, right? And the JavaScript really wasn't a big factor. And when it was there, it was like for menus and stuff like that, navigational control. So it wasn't a big problem. But as you started dealing with these, what do you call it? What's the the sites that become more modern, and I'm blanking on the term here, but where the applications are now asynchronously going, the JavaScript is asynchronously going back and hitting the server and interfacing with APIs and getting data. all of a sudden that JavaScript is now critical. If you're not executing the JavaScript and inspecting, the XML HTTP requests or the WebSocket requests, you're simply not going to be testing very much. And so the scanners, and I know at least for us, I'll speak for my what we had to do. We had to really take a big step back and completely rethink everything we were doing, and really think about where are things going, how's the future of development going, and then tackling those challenges. So we had to completely revamp our crawling mechanism. I'll call it a crawler. With that discovery piece, the execution of JavaScript code, harnessing a real browser, all that stuff had to be completely rebuilt, and that took time, and it was hard, and it took a lot of commitment and a team that could do that. And a lot of these products that are built by very large companies have a hard time moving at the pace you needed to move at, and that we had to move at. So,
well, and it sounds like you guys made the right decision to do that, though, because let's face it, right? You can't run the modern web today unless you're using JavaScript in a lot of places, whether it's React or Angular or even Vue.js, which is recently, I think, passed React in terms of GitHub stars, which is a big deal, I guess, in the development community. It's a situation now where it's everywhere. It's almost ubiquitous. I mean, one of the news stories in this show later on is going to be about how Microsoft is porting Skype to React Native, which, by the way, is JavaScript. So it sounds like that move was definitely a smart one for the company overall. Are there other evolutions that you continue to make beyond just being able to crawl JavaScript better?
Well, so you mentioned it a little bit earlier in terms of speed. The performance of scanning also needed to be improved, and it's contradictory to adding new capabilities, right? You're making the scanner do more, but you're expecting it to get done faster. And so some of that came by rethinking why we needed to do a full scan, right? And understanding what should we do to adapt. And some of that was doing things to get additional discovery data from things like, partnering up with what Selenium can do and how people use that for their QA functions, right, and their automated testing. We had to build up the scanner so that it could actually monitor a Selenium script, see what it was doing, see the usually doing positive testing, right? Click on this, see if this still works, and then come behind it and do attacks right behind it and do a very micro scan that's just attacking the things around that unit test. So that way we could actually kind of perform very, very quickly and turn around a scan of just that section in 10 minutes or something, as opposed to running a multi-hour scan. And then the bugs that come from that would be very similar, attached to the same things that the Selenium script was for. So kind of partnering up and figuring out, okay, it's not always critical or even possible to run a complete scan. So how do we run these different little micro scans, and how do we get those to turn around more quickly? So there was a lot of that kind of rethinking we had to do to keep pace, because, as you mentioned, speed is an issue. And I agree, static analysis tools have their problems. Dynamic tools have their problems. Both are important. I don't suggest anybody do just DAS scanning. If you can do static, you should do it.
So Dan, hold on. I just want to back up what you're saying, because I think it's really interesting. In a more modern development environment, I mean, let's use Security Week as an example, right? Like, we're setting up Selenium scripts or some type of test unit to basically do unit testing, to test about functionality in scripts that we know about. What you're saying is your dynamic scanner can take that and use that as a base, and then do security testing on top of that.
Yeah, one of the early premises I had is, there's a couple things. One is, if the scanner doesn't do it, it's probably not going to get done, right? Relying on the user to manually tune and tweak the scan or manually crawl things, that's going to work okay for some of the most critical apps, but for the most part, companies have too many apps and not enough time. So the scanner has to automate it. So then, if that's your premise, then you have to take advantage of anything possible, right? If there's any kind of proxy logs, I want to take them in, right? We can import from any proxy, right? Fiddler, even WebScarab, right? We all the way back. If there's Selenium scripts, there's unit testing, I want to consume that, right? If we have Swagger documents that are documenting the API, I want that. Anything that tells me something about that app, I want to take it in. And then for Selenium in particular, why not just piggyback right behind it? It's doing positive testing. It's telling me valid input for fields and things like that. We'll run a scan right behind that and do the attacks, right? And do the negative testing, right?
Yeah, I really like that. The way that I'm trying to design our development environment, right, is that we have those two different types of testing, right? I want testing to validate that, like, stuff I know about. In other words, when you go to this link, you should get an HTTP 200. You shouldn't get a 500 internal server error, right? And we just need that every time we do a build. We got to make sure that it's like automated regression testing, like make sure everything functions and isn't falling over. Then I think security testing is very different from that. And I think a lot of times we don't make the distinction. In the security test, I want you to throw everything at it and try and make it fail, right? And understand the threat models that when I throw garbage at it, is it going to break? And I think those are two different levels of testing. What I find is interesting, and I'm not sure you've come across this, right? Those are all just bugs, and they have to be fixed. Like whether they're security related or whether they're functional or whether they're performance, they're all bugs that have to be fixed. Sure, the development teams, management, everyone has to determine the priority, but they're all bugs. Is that kind of the similar approach? That's kind of what I hear you going.
Yeah, 100%. And I was mentioning this when we were talking before and kind of getting ready for this call. And I have this on my slides when I go out and do talks at conferences. It is critical that we do not just try to have a security team run our product and deliver a security report to the development team. That is the worst thing you can do. It gets everybody's back up. People get very defensive. But if you just take the issues, early on, I wanted all of our data needed to be programmably consumable. Originally, that was XML. Then we switched over to JSON. But the idea is, I want you to be very easily be able to take our data and push it into your bug tracking system, because a bug is a bug is a bug. Developers are used to bugs all day, right? That's half of their life, right? Is split between bugs and feature development. And if you just report a bug into their Jira or whatever they're using, you will get a lot less friction between the security team and the development team, because you're going and you're delivering it the way they want to see it. And that's super important.
But now I also feel like once we've got that implemented, that there still needs to be, I think in both cases, right, there has to be a user that's going to test functionality, and there has to be a user that's going to test security, because as much as we put into our automated tests, it'd be interesting to get your take on this. You've been doing automated testing for a long time. As much as we put into that, like there's still stuff that just a human, maybe with some tooling, but a human needs to discover that.
Oh yeah, so I kind of generally have the philosophy that I don't, and we sometimes don't have things in our scanner that people ask for, because I don't think we could do it with enough confidence that I would want to put results, right? I don't want to try to do, privileged, controls, like, am I getting too much data than I should and stuff like that, right? Because I can't do it reliably. There's a lot of things that a human tester can only do, right? Because a scanner is a machine. It does not understand context and real world implications of data that it might be pulling up that, maybe access controls aren't doing their job, right? It's not going to really appreciate that. Human testers have to do that. And what I want the scanner to do is cover all the baseline stuff, right? It should be handling the vast majority of the SQL injections, the cross-site scriptings, all these basic level stuff. It needs to do those. It needs to do them reliably. And then that should free up the human pen tester to focus on, the buffer overflow attacks, or, that they really want to test, or the access controls. All that stuff needs to be done. The business logic flaws need to be done by the human tester, and they need to be able to rely on the tool to do the baseline stuff for them, so they're not wasting their time on that, right? They may want to validate off of the data from the scanner, but largely they should be focusing on things that they know the scanner can't do, and make a kind of a clear line between the two.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree.
So the other side of this as well that I imagine must get interesting for you, because I know that there's tools like Postman, et cetera, that developers are using to just test that they actually have a functional REST API, but they don't necessarily build unit tests or integration tests, even though they should. for those APIs. What are you doing to deal with kind of the advent of API-based development, especially in the world of like serverless, right, where you expect to make a call out to a function that returns something back to you, and that's kind of it. What are you trying to do to deal with maybe that sort of on the horizon change that's coming forward?
So we started adding support. We originally started adding support for Swagger. We've got a couple other formats that we've been that have not as good support, but like RAML and XML. What is it? Whatever. There's a couple of them. There's RAML and there's another one. There's XML something. But what we're trying to do is get people to give us the documentation, because obviously with an API, if I don't know what's there, right? Like when you back in the day with web services, when you had SOAP had a WSDL with it, right, which described all of the methods and parameters. REST is a lot looser. It doesn't have a built-in format like that. So it's been important for us to push organizations to adopt things like Swagger that will inform us about what that API has on it, so then we can go test it. It's still, there's still some limitations because actually a lot of the problems with REST APIs are business logic flaws. We still find some SQL injection, input injection type of attacks, but a lot of them are business logic flaws, which again kind of go back to a human to do some testing. We try to get some clues, but it's a tough one there. Doing business logic flaws are not good for a machine.
And when it comes to data output as well, right? How do you guys deal with that? I know that you're putting it out in a JSON format, but are you doing anything with integrations into ticketing systems, or how's the reporting offered up to the security team, first of all, in terms of maybe how are you using like CWEs, like are you using CVSS? But then also from there, what is maybe the best methods that you're seeing teams use today to actually deliver this back to the development teams in an effective manner?
Yeah, so we have the CVEs. We actually do have CVSS support, so you can adjust the scoring based on its parameters. So we've done a lot of that. There's another one. There's another format or whatever that we do.
CW,
yes, we take a bunch of them. Oval, I think is what it is. We take a bunch of the different, we output in, and we try to inform users as much as we can about, so they can categorize things. So we have a lot of little, data points for each vuln, but we do have integrations with a bunch of different tracking systems. Jira is obviously the most popular out there, but we have like ServiceNow and I don't know. We have a whole integrations team that handles a lot of that. So I don't really get too heavily involved, but my goal for them is always just to get it into any, whatever tool the customer has, just push it into their tracking system.
Awesome. Now, I know that as around the time that I was leaving, you guys had just launched, I think it was the beta for Insight AppSec, which is a little bit different than the traditional model of scanning that people have seen with DAST tools that you install it on a base system and scan within your environment. How has that been going? I know that tell us a little bit about it, because I know about it, but obviously our listeners don't. And what are you guys trying to achieve there?
Yeah, so a lot of this, when we built the tool right all the way back in the NTO days, it was a desktop tool, right? And so but we had built also an enterprise product so that you could have a web interface that wraps around it. But our focus largely had been building this scanning engine, and that was really the core of what we did, and most of my team did for a dozen years, right? Is working on that engine and making it the best we could. When we got over to Rapid7, they had been starting to build up their Insight platform and trying to bring all their products to this Insight platform. And so we went, and basically it's a web interface that gives the user the ability to run all their scanning activity, and it uses our very advanced, our scanning engine that we pour a ton of energy into, right? A bunch of our life is wrapped around that engine and trying to figure out all the ways to scan things like I've been describing earlier. So all of that is now wrapped in this nice little web interface where you can go in there, log in, schedule up your scans, run them, get the results, and it's got the integrations into the Jiras and all that stuff. It also has some APIs that we're getting ready to release, along with updates to our Jenkins plugins. We make it very easy to kick off our scans in your automated process. We have Jenkins and Bamboo plugins.
I was going to ask you that. Yeah, that's awesome. You built that in.
Yeah, so it's all there, and it all runs from the cloud. So it's our engines. You just point it to it and let it go. Of course, we have support for on-prem engines in case it's not a public-facing site that you need to test or whatever. So it's been really, really fun getting that out. And now really we've kind of got a lot of the baseline stuff done, and we're starting to look at innovative new stuff to do. What I think is really kind of cool at Rapid7 is we have lots of data, right? We have from all of the Nexpos or now Insight VM stuff, our Sonar projects, all this stuff we've got going on. We have tons of data and tons of data analytics, and so I'm looking forward to really applying a lot of that to application security data. We haven't, in application security, we've generally, just industry-wide, dynamic scanners have not really helped people understand their trends and how they're getting better. And there'll be the white hats out there would do their annual report and talk about like time to fix stats, and they would kind of do those annual reports. I want all that real time. I want you to be able to see in real time how you're doing, how you compare to your industry peers, and really kind of get data analytics around your application security program. Because we have a lot of customers that have thousands of applications, and they just don't know how they're doing, or they're trying to build all that themselves and trying to analyze it. And so we want to be providing a lot of that.
That's awesome. Yeah, especially the data analytics side. I mean, everybody seems to be looking for data scientists today, and thankfully, Bob Rudis, data scientist at Rapid7, has done some amazing work over there for the Insight platform as a whole. Paul, do you have any last questions before we ask the 5 questions for Application Security Weekly?
I do. Dan, have you looked into, and I know some of the competitors in the space have done this to a limited degree, but have you looked into putting some type of agent or hook into the web application that gives you then telemetry? Now, I know we already established that in today's development world, everyone has their framework of choice, which makes that difficult. But have you looked into that?
Yeah. So, and I kicked myself for not mentioning it earlier. Thanks for bringing it up. With at Rapid7, we have this agent for the Insight platform, and it's largely used for our vulnerability management tool. Mm-hmm. But it's also used by our IDR process, and it's a bunch of that stuff. We're going to actually be able to start getting data from that, and so we can actually get some stuff on the system and kind of be looking at hey, oh cool, we've got our agent on there. Tell me about the look at the Apache config. Mm-hmm. And look at the web root. Give me a directory tree. I want more data. I also want to monitor the error logs while I'm, launching my attacks. So in real time, I'm able to see that maybe that SQL injection actually did work. I just couldn't see it because it was suppressed, error suppression on the website, which is what they should be doing. But now all of a sudden I got behind the scenes. So that is definitely on track. We're also absolutely looking at attaching to the code, right? Like IAST and RASP products do. And monitoring execution. But my first step is I want to get, what can we see with the agent we already have and what can we add to it? And that already is starting to look very cool on what we're able to see there.
No, that's awesome. And there's an added benefit there. If it's the unified agent, I can do my operating system updates and get my vulnerability and even other security data as well. So I think that's really cool.
Yeah.
And when I was at Rapid7, that was one of the things that I always thought was pretty incredible about the agent is it's like a Swiss Army knife, right? It had all of the functionality that you would need, and depending on the products that you were using or purchasing, you could leverage the different behaviors or functionality that you actually wanted to use. So it's awesome to hear that Insight AppSec and I imagine the AppSpider tool are going to be leveraging that to some degree. So that's awesome to hear because again, it's one agent for all of your needs, depending on which products you have. So good to hear.
Well, and I want to mention, that's one of the things that's kind of fun. I was obviously in my own, independent company for a long time, right? But it's very cool, and I think it's interesting. Most of the application security products are certainly moving more to the left, and I think that's obviously important, right? Static analysis and trying to merge static and data and DAST, and we may want to do that too. But what I think is really cool at Rapid7 in particular is because we have all these other tools, right? We have the vulnerability management, the IDR products, our recent acquisition of Command, which is going to let us do a ton of stuff around automation, our log entries, which ties a lot into the IDR or Insight Ops is what we call it now. All of this stuff gives us a real interesting view of an organization's overall security posture, right? That I think is fairly unique and very interesting in what we're able to start pulling together. Obviously, we got to execute and get there, but I think we have a good vision behind what we're trying to do.
Awesome. All right, I have 5 more questions for you, Dan. Are you ready for Application Security Weekly's 5 questions?
Fire away.
All right. First and foremost, what were the specs like on your first computer?
I believe it was a Tandy 1000 that I had gotten at Radio Shack.
Nice.
Was my and I had it was a hard one to buy because I was like 16, I think, at the time when I got it, and so I was like doing all kinds of odd jobs just to pay for it.
I don't know if it was just me. It sounded like my audio cut out. Maybe it was just me.
I'm hearing a lot of noise static, right now for some reason.
I think it's Keith.
Uh-oh. I hope not. Here, let me make sure that turn off the AC in the background here. So, with just curious, how much did a Tandy 1000 cost? You're 16. I'm trying to think of like price point. Like, 'cause I remember what I could buy at 16 was not a great computer. So I'm curious to know what like the running cost was.
It was expensive. I feel like it was. I think I got it used because it was like the display one I had been playing with at the Radio Shack. And I ended up helping like the store manager a whole bunch. I even did an inventory with him one night, just as like hanging around. And so he sold it to me for pretty cheap, which I think, if I remember correctly, was around $800, and it probably sold for well over $1,000.
Nice.
Wow. Yeah, no, back then that was a steal because I remember trying to buy $1,000 computer at that age, and you're like, yeah, never going to happen. Not until I'm like 25. So, next question I have for you is, what programming language did you learn first?
Shoot. I mean, the first thing I think was Batch, and then I was doing some. I had some binary editor I'd gotten off of a BBS, and so I was doing some like tweaks with binary, and then I think the first like formal language I really started programming in was Visual Basic, I think. Yeah.
Nice.
Horrible.
Nice. Yep. Also, then, what programming language or languages do you recommend people should ramp up on today?
Man, well, Java obviously is if you want to do software development professionally, Java is a very popular language for that. I do feel like we're running out of C++ developers, and there's still a lot of stuff that needs to be done in C++. So maybe selfishly, I want more C++ developers out in the industry. So that would be nice. And then like Python, I guess. I do most of my stuff in PHP because I've been doing PHP forever, and it's just easy for quick hacks when I want to toss something together.
That is a good way to describe PHP, quick hacks.
Yeah. I don't want to build anything real in PHP. Not anymore.
No, definitely not. I actually skipped a question here that I meant to ask earlier, which is Vim or Emacs?
There's only one right answer, and that is Vim.
Yay!
Paul is very pleased.
I got scared because the last guest said Emacs, and I thought I liked him up until that point, but
so you just cut the interview right there.
That's it. It was done.
I mean,
I still use Vim. I use Vim for pretty much everything.
I do too.
I can't. I mean, there's other text editors that I'll use here or there, but I just like the raw code.
For me, it's VS Code with Vim plugins. Just that's the way I roll. It's got to be Vim key bindings to say the least.
I did install it and I tried using it, and I like the formatting. I like some of that stuff. It is nice, but I don't like that I have to like drill in so much.
Yeah, it does. It is a little intense from a setup standpoint, that's for sure. And then you have to be doing like some serious programming to get a lot of use out of the IntelliSense and some of the other functionality that you can get with some of those plugins. So if you're just kind of hacking around on it, it can be mixed results, I guess.
Well, that's what I find too. Like I'll SSH into a system. I'm like, I just need to update my Python script like right on the system. So I just always use it.
Paul's clearly not following, version control protocols here. Just saying. Last question for you, Dan. Who would you nominate, or what subject would you like to see covered on a future episode of Application Security Weekly?
Well, so look, again, I think it's important for people to understand how applications are developed, and I don't know, I confess I haven't listened to very many episodes of the show. I should be listening to it like every week, but deep dives into some of these frameworks and how they're built. It's important for people to understand how like a React works, is built, and what the shadow DOM means to how things execute. Some of the understanding how these Ajax SPA frameworks actually function and what they're doing and why people are using them is super important, I think, for application security people these days. If you don't really understand how these frameworks work and the things that the nature of development and how they change the nature of development, if you don't understand that and you're not diving into it, you're going to be at a serious disadvantage.
I'd like to second that, more. Keith. Yeah, because exactly. I think Dan nailed it. Like, we talk about security for these applications, and it changes so fast. And oftentimes on the show, I have to stop Keith and be like, "Whoa, wait, what are you talking about? I'm so lost right now."
Yeah, but you need like a good developer to really dive in and explain why they're using these frameworks and what the frameworks are doing for them.
Well, not even that, but a lot of people go in using these frameworks and they don't necessarily know like the underpinnings of it, right? So people will use Angular or React, but they don't understand Node. And then those people that are using Node don't understand JavaScript. Yeah. And so it gets interesting in that regard. And I have some book recommendations on that. But with that, we are going to take a short break and come back for the news.